So the dimensional trial of Island of Terror is completely different from the standard 2-star version you already know. You might have tried already the early levels and you notice that there's a lot of stuff happening. And it will of course get worse if you get to the higher tiers. But to get the maximum reward of the trials, you want to be able to clear the trials on tier 5. It's not easy, but don't worry, I will explain all the tips and tricks you need to know to master all of those tiers. Okay, besides all the new mechanics we get through the tiers, we also get way more fury and wrath attacks. You might notice this even at tier 1 and tier 2. And here comes the first tip. Don't go into tier 3 of the dungeon as long as you have not mastered the fury and wrath attacks. And I mean to a perfection. You really need to understand the timing of the fury attacks. If you have to think about the fury and the wrath attacks, if you should do a stand block or a movement block, and this comes not automatically, then you are not ready for tier 3. So what you will do, just spam tier 1 and tier 2 and get used to the fury and the wrath attacks and just practice it. But you need to be at a point where you block those fury attacks just automatically. Besides that, the first change you will notice is on the fireball attack he does. Now the stun he applies at the end of the series is way longer. And most of the time he will follow that up with a fury attack. If you want to block the fury attack, you of course shouldn't be stunned. That's why you need a bow player who removes the stun with purifying touch. So you of course always want to have a bow player in your party. If your tank has enough debuff duration, then the stun doesn't last too long, then he's able to block it without purifying touch. But the problem with that is that he often loses aggro then. So I noticed that a lot of times during my runs, that if the tank is not able to hit the boss, then of course the damage dealer can easily take aggro. And this is of course also something you always want to avoid. The first actual additional mechanic you get are the lizards, which spawn when the boss calls his meteors for the first time. So the boss will disappear and the lizards will spawn. They are usually absolutely no problem. But what helps here is if the tank stays in the middle and just taunts the lizard when they are spawning. Then they are not running around and dealing damage to everyone. Okay, so let's come to the Geyser mechanic. Okay, for clearing the smoke, you might have noticed that you are not ignited for that long anymore. Before it was 8 seconds and now it's 5 seconds. Just be aware of that, it's way harder to clear all the smoke now. Other than that, the mechanic is for the most part completely the same. But important is here, he always will finish the second meteor phase with a wrath attack. The wrath attacks, so the pink diamond attacks, will always slow you, so if you fail to block them. And he does that always right before he activates the Geyser. And of course if you are slowed, then you might not make it to the bubbling Geyser. But here's also a tip, if you are a bow player you can remove slows with Nature's Blessing. So a bow player could always save here Nature's Blessing and cleanse everyone from the slow. So if people fail it, you can make sure that they still reach the Geyser. Okay, these are the basics you have to understand before you go to tier 3. Because here we're getting now the next additional mechanic. This mechanic always starts after you had once the red mechanic and then the Geyser mechanic. Then you will see him jump into the middle of the arena and light up a little bit red. Now you will do 4 fire waves which you have to jump over. And here's important, the first one always comes here from this side. So you see me here directly turning into this direction, so I know when I have to jump. Then the next 3 are completely random, but one wave will come from each side once. So after the first jump, quickly turn around and try to jump over all the other waves. And really stop attacking here and just focus on the jumps. If your reaction time is just a little bit too slow for that. You can also try to constantly jump and you will most likely dodge most of the fire waves. Important is here when the last fire wave comes, he will do a fireball attack on the tank and follow that up with a fury attack. So here it's important that the bow player removes the stun from the tank with purifying touch. Otherwise you will get hit by the wave and by the following fury attack. Of course everyone else also needs to block the fury attack. But here again a tip, if you're in the middle of the arena you should have enough time to do your jump and then block afterwards. It's just something you need to get used to. Always remember, first red phase, then the Geyser mechanic, and afterwards always those fire waves will come. Okay, now we're coming to tier 5 where all the fun starts. Okay, the first thing that would change here is that you don't see any indicators anymore of when you have to block. So you don't have to think here anymore if you have to do a movement block or a stand block. And you need to know the timing of the block. Be sure to practice those Fury and Wrath attacks on the lower tiers. And this is for tier 5 just the absolute basis. Everyone learns on a different speed, take as much time as you need, but you need to be at a point where this is just muscle memory. Okay, but then what is in tier 5 also changing are the two major mechanics. So the red mechanic and the Geyser mechanic. So let's start with the red mechanic. Okay, first of all important here, everyone dies if one player fails. Okay, that's of course already really brutal, but you can't kite the boss anymore inside of the circle. Why, you might ask? Because he gets a huge fire area around him. And if everyone would be in the middle, then the fire would just kill everyone. So how you play the mechanic is that you assign 3 players doing the kiting and 3 other players just going into the ground. So the 3 kiting players will try to kite the boss through the arena. Okay, so how do you do that? When the mechanic starts, you won't have this fire area right away. So you have a little bit of time to distract here the boss in the middle. So the 3 non-kiting players will just distract here the boss for around 2 seconds. So remember, he always goes to the closest red to him. Important here, you just distract him for 2 seconds and then these 3 players just go into the ground and wait till the mechanic is over. Okay, then 2 of the players who are assigned to do the kiting walk to beforehand assigned places. So usually here and here. So when the mechanic starts, you directly walk to your position. You might get feared, but that's really not a big deal. Just run straight to your position. Just be careful that you don't run into a flower accidentally. This will of course transform your back and will immediately kill you. So 2 of the kiting players are now in position, but to give those players a little bit more time, you have a 3rd kiting player. And this kiting player always stays inside of the circle and kites him as far away as possible. So you usually kite him here to this position and then goes into the ground. But important, this guy is not leaving the circle. Now the fire area should appear and he will walk to one of the 2 kiting players, because everyone else is in the ground. And of course these players also go into the ground if the boss reaches them. But here important, they have to go into the ground before the circle hits them, because otherwise they will get feared again and then they will of course die. So he goes to one player, then he goes into the ground, then he goes to the other player on the other side of the arena, then he goes into the ground. But while this is happening, the other player can already come back out. And that's then how you kite the boss here. For the kiting players, it's just really important that you're not getting hit by the ring. And if you're not a kiting player, just stay in the ground. You don't do anything anymore. It sounds complicated, but if you have failed here a couple of times, you know how to do that. Okay, now the last and little more tricky mechanic is the Geyser mechanic. So after this red phase, he will do a series of fury and wrath attacks. And he will as normal call the meteors and the mechanic starts. So the main part of the mechanic is the same. He will call 2 sets of meteors and you need to clear the smoke on the geysers. So you see which geyser is activated. So completely normal. But at the moment the mechanic starts, you will see that every player has an indicator with 30 stacks over his head. You will lose those stacks if you clear the smoke. So if you are ignited and run through the smoke, then you are clearing the smoke. And at the same time, you're losing stacks. Important here is that one player loses all of his stacks in those 2 meteor phases. So you assign one player who runs through the arena ignited and just tries to clear as much smoke as possible. Let's call him Runner. So our runner only focuses on losing stacks. And all the other players need to clear the geysers. But important, they are not allowed to clear too much smoke, because if they clear too much smoke, that makes it really hard for the runner to lose all his stacks. How you usually play that is that people understand when the meteors will come, and they already run directly to the geysers. And if they are lucky, the geysers will directly drop onto them and clear all the smoke directly on the geysers. But even if not, just try to be careful not to clear too much smoke here, because the runner will need it. The runner really needs to be efficient here. So he has 2 times 5 seconds to lose all his 30 stacks. Okay, first of all, what is really important is that he dodges the first meteors, because the smoke will not directly appear. If you are getting hit directly from the meteor, then you lose 2 seconds of being ignited. So the runner dodges the meteors, and as soon as the smoke appears, he ignites himself and runs through the smoke. So the runner has for sure the hardest part here, because he really needs to be able to manage his stamina. And in the second meteor phase, the boss will also do some fury attacks, so you of course also need to look out for those. So most of the time I had at the end really no stamina anymore. But as already mentioned, he will always finish the second meteor phase with a fury and a wrath attack. And of course, if you don't block the wrath attack, then you will get slowed and you might not be able to reach the geyser. That's why it's of course really helpful here if the bow player uses Nature's Blessing right at the end of the phase. So you see me here not being able to block the Wrath attack, but the bow player immediately uses Nature's Blessing to remove the slow. Okay, so after both meteor phases, all the geysers should be free and the runner should have 0 stacks. Okay, so why does he need 0 stacks? Because now the boss will activate one geyser. You all normally go into the geyser, you will get knocked up into the air, you fall down, and now it's important that you all stack up. Now the boss will come and will put everyone into a bubble who has still stacks. So 5 players will be in a bubble and the player who lost all his stacks will be free. And you need this player to be free because if you jump onto the bubbles, then they will explode and the players will be free again. So you just press space and jump on the position where the bubbles are. That's just the way how you destroy the bubbles. And if you stack all up on one point, then it's way easier to get everyone immediately out of the bubbles. And then you have finished and survived the mechanic. And after this mechanic, he will then do again his fire waves. So he will always do the red phase into the geysers into the fire waves. And he will repeat and repeat and repeat this. So tier 5 is of course not easy, it's a lot of new stuff, of course you need to get used to mechanics, but you need to master all of the mechanics in the lower tiers. So you master the Fury and the Wrath attacks in tier 1 and 2, then you go in tier 3, then you master the jump mechanic, and then if you have mastered those mechanics to perfection, then you can go and learn the tier 5 mechanics. Just be sure to always label your group correctly. So you could label it as learning new tier 5 mechs or whatsoever. Labeling your party correctly in the party finder will get you people that are on the same level as you. And that's just really important. If you open a party and you label it as understand mechs and then you are their boss and the people clearly don't understand the mechs, it's just really frustrating. So if you want to learn the mechanics, then you label your group as learning party. But yeah, I think the mechanics are really fun. It's of course also really challenging, but for me it's just really fun. But yeah, just be nice to each other and have fun learning the new mechanics. Okay, so if you have further questions, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching and see ya in the next one.